The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church, casting patterns of blue and gold across the empty pews. Daniel stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at those same windows. 5 years had passed since he last stood in this spot, wearing a different suit, waiting for a bride who never came. He was here today as the best man for his college roommate, Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on him. Daniel had spent years avoiding weddings after what happened with Sarah. He'd made excuses, sent gifts, claimed work obligations. But Marcus was different. Marcus had been there that day, had driven him home in silence, had sat with him through the long night that followed. The church was filling up now. Daniel watched the guests arrive, couples holding hands, families chattering softly. His chest felt tight, the way it always did when memories of that day surfaced. Sarah in her white dress, or at least the photographs of it he'd seen later. She'd made it as far as the bride's room before she'd called her sister in, tears streaming down her face, and told her she couldn't do it. Daniel had received the news through a chain of whispers that traveled from the bride's room to his groomsmen to him. The wedding coordinator had approached with careful steps and careful words. Miss Crawford wasn't coming. Miss Crawford was sorry. Miss Crawford had left through the side entrance. He'd stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, processing the words. Then he'd walked down the aisle alone, past the confused faces of 200 guests, and out into the parking lot where Marcus found him sitting on the curb. "You okay, man?" Marcus appeared beside him now, adjusting his bow tie. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Just thinking about her." Daniel didn't need to ask who. "It's hard not to, being here." Marcus squeezed his shoulder. "I get it. But hey, you came. That means something." The organ music started, and everyone took their positions. Daniel stood to the side of the altar, watching as Marcus's bride appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant and certain. He felt a genuine happiness for his friend, mixed with something else he couldn't quite name. Not jealousy. Not bitterness. Maybe just a quiet sadness for what he'd lost. The ceremony was beautiful. The bride and groom said their vows without hesitation, their voices strong and sure. When the priest pronounced them married, the church erupted in applause, and Daniel found himself clapping too, a real smile on his face. The reception was held at a restored barn on the edge of town, with string lights hanging from the rafters and wildflowers on every table. Daniel made his toast, keeping it light and funny, telling stories about Marcus's terrible cooking skills in their college apartment. People laughed, and he felt himself relaxing, letting the warmth of the celebration sink in. He was standing by the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey, when he saw her. Sarah was across the room, partially hidden by a group of dancers. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair shorter than he remembered. She was talking to someone, her hands moving as she spoke, that familiar gesture he'd almost forgotten. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He set his glass down, suddenly aware of every sound in the room, every movement. He hadn't known she'd be here. Marcus hadn't mentioned it, though maybe that had been deliberate kindness. As if sensing his gaze, Sarah looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Her face went pale, then flushed. She said something to the person she'd been talking to and started walking toward him. Daniel's instinct was to leave, to walk out the same way he'd walked out of the church 5 years ago. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was just time. "Hello, Daniel," Sarah said when she reached him. Her voice was softer than he remembered, tentative. "Sarah." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the music and laughter swirling around them. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "I should have thought. Marcus is your friend. Of course you'd be here. I didn't know you'd be here either. I work with Anna, the bride. We met at the hospital. I'm a nurse now." She paused. "I wanted to leave when I saw you, but that seemed cowardly. More cowardly than I've already been." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked tired, but also somehow more settled, more herself. "Can we talk?" Sarah asked. "Just for a few minutes. I know I don't deserve it." They walked outside to a small garden behind the barn. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of honeysuckle. They sat on a wooden bench, leaving space between them. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, not looking at him. "I've wanted to say that for 5 years. I'm so sorry, Daniel. What I did was cruel. You deserved better than that. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He'd imagined this conversation countless times, scripting angry speeches, devastating responses. But now that the moment was here, the anger felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Why did you leave? He asked. I never understood. Sarah took a breath. I was 23. I thought I knew what I wanted, but standing in that room, putting on that dress, I realized I didn't know myself at all. I was following a script I thought I was supposed to follow. And I panicked. She finally looked at him. It wasn't about you. You were wonderful. That was the worst part. You deserved someone who was sure. You could have told me before that day. I know. I should have. I was scared, and I was stupid, and I hurt you badly. I've carried that guilt every day since. They sat in silence, listening to the music drifting from the barn. I'm not that person anymore, Sarah continued. I went to therapy. I figured myself out. I learned to be alone, to know what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. She smiled sadly. Too late for us, obviously. But I wanted you to know that I grew up. That I understood what I did. Daniel felt something shift inside him, a knot he'd been carrying loosening slightly. Thank you for telling me. Are you happy? Sarah asked. He thought about it. I'm getting there. I threw myself into work for a long time. Made partner at the firm last year. Started therapy myself, actually. He laughed softly. Turns out being left at the altar requires some processing. I'm glad you got help. They talked a while longer, about safe things at first, their jobs, mutual friends, the changes in town. Slowly, the conversation became easier, more natural. They weren't the same people who'd stood at that altar 5 years ago. They'd both been broken and rebuilt into something different. When they walked back inside, Marcus caught Daniel's eye and raised his eyebrows in question. Daniel nodded, a small smile on his face. He was okay. As the night wound down, Daniel and Sarah exchanged phone numbers, with no promises, no expectations. Maybe they'd get coffee sometime. Maybe they'd just exchange occasional texts. Maybe nothing would come of it at all. But as Daniel drove home that night, he felt lighter than he had in years. The past was still there, still painful in places, but it no longer felt like a weight pulling him under. Sometimes people came into your life at the wrong time. Sometimes they left at the worst possible moment. And sometimes, if you were lucky, fate gave you a chance to make peace with what had been, and maybe, just maybe, find a way forward you hadn't expected. The church's stained glass windows would always hold that memory. But now they held something else too, the possibility of forgiveness, and the quiet hope that comes with truly letting go.